I know it's 3 o'clock, almost at the end of the day. Before I actually start my presentation, my name is Jalal, as he was pointing out. I do want to give, if you guys can do me one favor, I do want to give a big round of applause to Kiran and his team for putting together such an amazing ATS. So if you guys don't mind, and indulge me. Thank you so much. I love the venue, amazing energy. So thank you so much, guys. I know it's not easy. Now that's out of the way. That's the most amount of fun you're going to have for the next 20 minutes. So with that, let me get started with this. So the topic of our discussion is children's online privacy violation risk in mobile advertising. Just some quick commercial for like 5 seconds about what Pixelate, who Pixelate is, and my background as well. So Pixelate provides tools and research to the ad industry to manage fraud, privacy, children's privacy, and regulatory compliance risks in digital advertising ecosystem and the supply chain, specifically around mobile and connected TV. We were founded in 2012, and we are based, our headquarters is in Palo Alto, and we have a team which is growing significantly in London as well. And we sort of provide fraud and compliance solutions to the ad industry, as I kind of mentioned. Last year, we raised almost $18 million to scale our sort of advertising fraud prevention offering and the privacy offering and taking it global. Quick background about myself. My name is Jalal. I'm the CEO and the founder of the company. My background is in fraud, credit card fraud protection. I used to work for Amazon.com back in 2004 when credit card fraud was a big deal and dealing with credit card, third-party risks, et cetera. And then after that, I worked for Microsoft and also for a compliance company as well. And most of the things that we have sort of deployed at Pixelate have been inspired from some of my experiences back then. Just some quick background on the solutions that we offer. We provide intelligence around fraud and compliance on all the big app stores that are out there, including Apple, Google's Play Store, and Roku and Amazon Fire TV. We have data on 50 million plus publishers that you can just look up online, even for free. And it tells you historical information about how they're doing and sort of like almost like a 411 on where they're registered, how much ad spend they have, et cetera, from the programmatic space. And then fraud and compliance monitoring as well. We have an analytics tool and a fraud blocking solution as well. We have uncovered hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud. Some of the big schemes that we've uncovered are mentioned over there. Megacast, DiCaprio, Monarch. Actually, we are the first company which discovered the first connected TV fraud scheme. So you can actually see that in a video, like how actually that is happening almost 2 years ago in the name of DiCaprio. So you can, that's actually on our website if you want to sort of take a look. One of the things that I'm here for is we produce a lot of industry-leading reports, and we make that data available for free. These are some of the reports that we produced on some of the app stores. The ones that actually became really popular in the last couple of months is the report on the sanctions because of the unfortunate conflict going on in Russia and Ukraine. So we were publishing, if you see the third one, the list of apps and websites that were registered to the state, the Russian state, and then also that were serving programmatic advertising. So we made that data available for free. So anyone in the industry could actually use that and basically take appropriate actions, et cetera. We're also very popular for the Seller Trust Index. All the seller rankings in the industry, we update them on a quarterly basis. So one of the ways you can actually reduce fraud is working with like the top guys who are actually actively managing fraud and deploying solutions to manage the quality on their network, et cetera. This one, specifically talking about the topic today, is one of the things that my team looked at, and there's a whole story around it, which inspired me to look into it. Almost a year and a half ago, I was actually sitting down with my nephew, and he was almost 10 at that point. And because of the pandemic, schools were closed, And he was just playing on his mobile device that was given to him by his father. And he could download various apps without getting any explicit consent and start to basically play them. And as I was monitoring him and just looking at what he was doing, all those apps were serving ads that he was playing, a lot of the video games. And that was very alarming to me, that those apps actually did not ask any permission. They could get downloaded like that. And then they were serving ads. And that actually inspired me to start looking into this very closely with my team. And before I actually share the results of the study, I'm just curious, out of how many of you guys, as you're running your brands or managing your network, whether it's a DSP or a campaign, how many of you, just quick raise of hands, how many of you guys are actually targeting sort of audience above the age of 13? Just raise of hand, quick raise of hands. So audience above the age of 13, like are you targeting children as part of your media campaigns and buys? Just a quick raise of hands. So I'm seeing no hands, like where precisely most of the campaigns demographic-wise are not targeting children under the age of 13. And what has happened in the last 2 years, and this is what our research actually shows, is since children are spending so much time online on mobile devices, most of the ad spend could be going towards and being shown to children as inventory because the app stores are not differentiating it. Some of the ad industry is also not sort of keeping a microscopic look at that, and your ads could just be served towards children. And there's a lot of ethical and legal dimensions to that. But that is also in some ways, ad spend being wasted. So we started looking into that, and that's the result that we want to share. We specifically looked at mobile for this study, and because we believe most of the children are spending time, because of the pandemic, et cetera, in the last 2 years on their mobile devices. And we looked at Google and Apple as Play Stores. How many of you guys, quick raise of hand, are familiar with? So we looked at two laws around this as well. One in the US is called a law called COPPA, Children Online Privacy Protection Act, which regulates any online service, whether it's a mobile app or website. When they interact with children, they need to verify their users and get proper consent before they serve advertising or do any kind of data collection. And so that's on the US side. On the UK side, we saw in 2021 a new law getting enacted, which also sort of regulates protecting children's online data. So we sort of kept that was the third reason which actually inspired us to start looking into it, and how the ad industry could be getting impacted. Now, some of you folks might be aware, at least on the US side of the Atlantic, is the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has been very active in the last 12 to 16 months with bringing COPPA sort of settlements and cases against some of the ad tech industry as well. We saw one last year in 2021, almost like a $2 million settlement that was done. We've also seen that historically with other places as well. So we actually released this study last week, and I'm going to go into the details of that, and then there's going to be a Q&A session around that. Our research was published in Washington Post on Thursday, so any of you folks who want to read the details of that, I have the link where how some of these apps could be spying on children without their explicit consent and parents being made aware of that. Now, why did we have to do that? Why aren't the app stores doing it, is the first question. What we have seen, we actually spent a lot of time researching it. App stores, whether it's Google or Apple, have failed to categorize one thing. They have roughly 8.5 million apps. Yes, 8.5 million apps on the App Store. And Apple and Google do not categorize which apps are targeted towards children. And they leave it to the publishers or the app developers to self-declare which apps are targeted towards children. So we actually, I started building together a team last year. We hired someone from the FTC. Her name is Allison. She was one of the enforcers at the FTC looking at COPPA. And the second thing is we hired qualified teachers and educators to come and put together and give us views on this and help us manually do this as well, and with the data science team, so we could automate that for 8.5 million apps. That was one of the biggest operations that we have done. We categorized all the 8.5 billion apps and see which one were directed towards children. Now that is a legal terminology. Like, for instance, the kind of descriptions that they're using, the kind of icons or the images that they're using to sort of attract children. And then as a second dimension, which we believe is the most important, is how many of them were collecting data on children as well without explicit permission. So that's the data, the report that I'm going to share with you next. So here are some of our key findings. Out of 8.5 million apps on both Google and Apple, we saw roughly 400,000 apps being child-directed based on our methodology. So roughly, you could say around 10% of both Google and Apple app stores, apps were targeted towards children. When if you go and look at Google, they have a program called Teacher Certified Program or Teacher Approved Program. It only has 25,000 apps in there. And good luck finding apps which are targeting children and laid out on the Apple App Store. You can't even find them. And when we started looking into that, we found there were apps for real estate and dating apps being categorized for kids in the children's section. So it was very alarming. Now, out of all those apps, we found 40% of them directed with them actually transmitting geo and personal information. So that could be GPS coordinates. And these are apps that are actually serving ads. GPS coordinates and IP addresses, including IPv4 and IPv6, being transmitted in the bid stream, which is going on the programmatic side. So very alarming and very scary as well. And one of the research actually was done by a London-based company that kids cannot differentiate between content and advertising. And they're the most vulnerable part of our society. And I think as an industry, that's something that we should take a look at very seriously. We also found that programmatic ad spend on all these children-directed apps were almost 3x more than non-child-directed apps as well. So imagine, since kids are spending so much time on their mobile devices, most of the inventory that you could be seeing upstream could be basically children playing video games, et cetera. And then the last part, which I actually want to spend just 2 seconds on, and this has major implications. We found out of these apps, 12,000 of them did not have any privacy policy that we could detect. So they did not basically lay down how they were collecting data, where was their data going for, so no sort of serious regulatory sort of challenges around that, which, at least on the US side, is a clear violation of the CAPA law, that you're not disclosing and putting all those things in a privacy policy. So with that said, I'm going to go into the details of this a little bit. I've broken this thing down by different app stores. So we found almost 380,000 apps on the App Store, and you can see sort of a breakdown. Obviously, Google is higher because they have more apps than Apple, but percentages-wise, they were roughly sort of similar. And this is all data that we measured in Q1 of this year, so from Jan to sort of March. We also looked at this other interesting angle, which was we looked at all the top 1,000 most popular apps on the App Store, Google and Apple, by user rating and download, and then saw how many of those apps were transmitting personal information. And those are the results which are almost 70%, both on Apple and Google, they were transmitting data to advertisers on these child-directed apps, whether that's geo, GPS coordinates, et cetera, being transmitted back to the bid stream. In a lot of the cases, we also found, especially on Apple, we found a lot of these devices had access to microphones and video and camera as well. So a lot of that data could be potentially passed as well in the background. And this, again, kind of shows sort of the breakdown of what kind of data being passed in the bid stream, whether it's personal info access, meaning video and camera, et cetera, and mic, IP addresses, and also GPS coordinates as well. So it's kind of gives you a breakdown by different sort of app stores in general. Now, this is the most fascinating and the most scary thing that I have seen in this report when we were compiling this. all these 8.5 million apps, and then we found out almost 400,000 apps that were targeted towards children. Roughly greater than 250,000 apps. If you go into the App Store, you can see where those apps are registered, right? The developer information for those, and which country. Almost 60 to 70% of them did not have any country of registration. And what that means is that data is basically being transmitted into a black box, could be going into any country that you could think of with different laws, et cetera, almost like a wild, wild west. And then it just kind of shows you sort of like how it basically goes from there, almost like a long tail. But a majority of them did not have any sort of country registered. For us, that was really scary because that has serious implications on the regulatory sort of element of that. This is another data that we kind of found because they were spending so much time just on the internet playing games. Most of these apps are more likely to transmit personal information and with advertisers. And this is, since we monitor the bid stream, we can see which information is getting accessed. I'm going to present this last slide, and then I'm going to have Lindsay sort of come up for a Q&A session. This is the piece which was really scary for us, and this is a clear violation of whether you want to call it a GDPR or CAPA or different regulations as well, is almost 21% of these apps on Apple and 11% on Google did not have any privacy policy. And for a brand or a DSP or an SSP, as you're figuring out third-party partners to work with or buy media from, that is something, if an app or a publisher does not have a privacy policy, that can create serious sort of legal implications as well, and whether that data is being acquired legally and being transmitted upstream legally as well. Again, as I mentioned, 3 times the ad spend on coming from children-directed apps, which was really sort of concerning. And with that said, I'm going to have sort of Lindsay come up, and then we can sort of zoom into any specific questions. Now, at the end, just as a teaser, we have this report available for free. We have made this data available for free as well to regulators, the ad industry as well. You can go to our website. You can look up any app and get that information. And we're going to talk a little bit about the next steps in terms of how we can, as a company, as an industry, deal with it from an advertising perspective.
Thanks, Jalal. That's pretty terrifying, isn't it?
It is. And as I kind of mentioned, some of the stuff that we found in terms of the data being transmitted, country of registration not sort of published, and ones with privacy policy missing was really scary for us. And on top of that, the fact that most of them, almost 3x more, were the inventory coming from them in the programmatic ad stream. That was really concerning from an industry point of view as well.
I read the Washington Post article that you referenced earlier, that was out a few days ago. Very interesting, and it mentions that apps that you would think that would not be listed in this kind of in this realm of doing dodgy things in terms of children's data, in terms of data from things being used by children, with the likes of Angry Birds, Candy Crush Saga, all the big kind of gaming apps that we would expect to be more on top of this, that we would think be COPPA compliant. And I forgot the name of the one in the UK because it's quite long-winded. What's the one in the UK called again?
ICO AI or something like that.
Thank you. I mean, they need to make that a bit more catchy, I think, but never mind. I'm interested in understanding from your perspective, does more need to be done on the regulatory side to ensure that this isn't happening on apps that we know and love and would assume would not be using our children's data in nefarious ways?
Right. I think it's very encouraging to see the regulators, whether it's the FTC or the law being enacted on the UK side, and seeing cases being brought up to create more sort of focus on that and spotlight on this very important issue on basically that part of the society which is most vulnerable. And as an ad industry, are we potentially monetizing and sending our ad spend to those kind of apps which are not cognizant of that fact? So that's something that we all need to sort of look at and see that very seriously. There are legal implications for that. There are ethical implications for that. And there's a fraud component to it as well. We talk about ad fraud and IVT, et cetera. But is that where as a brand you want to spend your ad front, is showing that to a demographic that's what you're not really targeting initially, to begin with.
Absolutely. And since the UK regulatory framework has come in, have you, because you've been tracking this obviously over the course of a quite a long period, have you seen an improvement in the trackability of children's data in that time period since it came in last year?
So we actually, I think we've seen since some of the settlement and the laws being passed, people are talking about it. The media is talking about it. In fact, President Biden talked about it for the first time in the history of the United States in his State of the Union about banning targeted advertising towards children. So there's the conversation is starting to happen. Unfortunately, there are two aspects which is creating this problem in a big way. If you look at the app stores, they don't take that up, sort of onerous on them. They have this concept called content rating, and they use that to sort of get around that. I think there is some obligation that should be put on the App Store. Also, from a programmatic advertising point of view, there is a field called OpenRTB for for age and whether something is child-directed or not. And it's really self-declared. So we've seen apps which are clearly, directed towards children, declaring themselves as adult only and getting around that so they don't get banned by the demand side.
And that's an interesting point. So actually, if we're trying to go down the self-regulation route, clearly it's not being done well enough. We're relying on publishers to declare that they're either targeting children or not, and they're not doing so effectively. What I also want to understand, of course, is whether from a business perspective, actually, you asked the question earlier, who here is targeting over 13s and ensuring they're not, that their targeting parameters are not also targeting 0 to 13-year-olds, and nobody raised their hand. Actually, is there a problem with potential money being lost in advertising? Like from a business outcome perspective, are we wasting money on targeting children when we could be putting that money to better use targeting our actual target audience instead?
Yeah, that's something that we found in our research as well. From a quantitative point of view, leaving the legal and ethical point of view aside as a society, a lot of this inventory, as I kind of mentioned, almost 3x more ad spend is going towards apps which are child-directed. So that's something that, as an industry, we need to think about whether, that's another element of due diligence that we want to add in our media buys and also in our verification processes.
And who is responsible for ensuring this? Is it the tech player? Is it the buyer? Is it the app publisher? Where does responsibility lie? And how can people make sure that they are not, unwillingly or unknowingly targeting children in their advertising?
I think I think it starts from, if you look at the ad industry, from the brands. Also, like for instance, if you're selling, if you're trying to target certain kind of demographic, do you really want to show, ads about alcohol to children who like someone who's a 10-year-old, right? And is that something that you want to sort of include that in your media buying process and due diligence as well? I also believe the onus is also on the SSPs, and as they partner with some of these publishers and bring them online for monetization, are they asking the right questions? Are they looking at do they have privacy policies in place? Are they changing those? What kind of data are they transmitting? That's where a lot of these issues start to come in. And from the buy side, I think we haven't seen a lot of folks initially, and now I think that conversation is changing. Is like, because of we living in a very privacy sort of centric environment, how is this data being collected? Is it being collected from the right sources? Is there proper consent that was sort of collected as part of the process?
I mean, you mentioned SSPs there. In fact, one was fined last year, $2 million for collecting child data. Do you think we'll see more of that regulation, more fines in that area?
Yeah, great question. I think we've seen, so two things. I think, I won't say it's like the fault of the SSP or the ad industry. I think the app stores have literally failed in correctly classifying when they can check whether, for instance, what data, there's a kids mode available in one of the app stores, and if they have that capability, it's just very unfortunate that they're not making it a priority and essentially making that part of the due diligence process. Now that said, we are seeing action being taken again from the FTC side. They're going after apps as well, not just the SSPs, and they're trying to get around this clause of actual knowledge, which is you need to have knowledge that you're actually targeting children, collecting data on children, and they're trying to sort of get around that by this whole notion of constructive knowledge around it. So,
And my final question, because we're almost out of time, is, obviously for you, this is basically providing a public service, so anybody can access this. What are the things that you want to see, like this audience you're speaking to about kind of understanding child data privacy? What do you want to see from them going forwards, and how do you want them to use your data? How do you want them to target more effectively? How do you want them to understand how they can avoid doing this?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we are doing is we have made this data available for free as of last Friday. So you can look up 8.5 million apps on our website. You can put in enter the bundle ID or the name, and we'll tell you whether that app is child-directed or not. We are constantly scanning the app store and checking the descriptions and the images using natural language processing, and we have a team of educators which are manually reviewing those apps as well. So you can actually go in and look at that from an SSP or a DSP perspective. As you're bringing those publishers or on board, you can check whether they have privacy policies in place, what data are they collecting as well, and whether they're child-directed or not. And from the buy side and regulatory point of view as well, like regulators really want that information. They don't have the technical capability to have a data science team which can basically scan the whole app store on a daily basis and see what's changing. So we're actually making this data available for free and giving the industry a way so they can get around the actual knowledge clause.
Brilliant. We're out of time, unfortunately, but that was really interesting. I'm sure something people will be taking into consideration going forwards. Well, I would hope so anyway.
Absolutely. And then one last thing is, if you have your mobile devices, you can actually scan our QR code. You can actually download the report and go to our website. It's going to take you there. So if you want to scan that, and then we have the report available at our booth as well.
And via that link, you can search for the apps as well?
Correct. Yep. So yeah, you can go to our website and search for those apps, and we have data on 8.5 million apps that we're updating on a daily basis.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jalal. A round of applause for Jalal, please. Thanks, guys.